In the 217th BlockTalks, we speak with Jeff Mahony, co-founder and Chief Architect of RYT, who explains how blockchains can combat corruption. I'm your host, Mauricio Magaldi, and this is Blockdrops, your weekly digest on blockchain for business. These news are not a form of endorsement, sponsorship, or encouragement for consumption, and are meant for educational purposes only. All right, everybody, I'm here with Jeff Mahony, who's going to tell us who he is and what he does with blockchain. Jeff, welcome to BlockTalks.
Wonderful. Thank you for having me. Well, I'm the co-founder and chief architect for RYT blockchain, RYT. We're a layer one. Our purpose is to create some real world activity to connect with those edges that are actually in the real world that provide that type of utility that we're looking for in the real world. I've been in the blockchain space, cryptocurrencies, etc., for quite some time, almost since the inception. Been intrigued by it. My degree is in cognitive science, so AI was something I did 30, 40 years ago. And I've always wanted this space to live up to its potential. While I've been playing around in this space, I've been working in fintech for a very, very long time. We've created some technology that provides investment services to big banking operations. We have about 7,000 banking operations that we service today all over the world. So we understand the banking side very, very well. We understand the government side very, very well. And we wanted to create something that we could put into a government space while connecting to the various edge pieces like the banks. My purpose as an individual is to help as many people as I can. I have a very distinct belief that talent is equally distributed across nations, wealth, ethnic background, whatever it might be, but I don't see opportunity equally distributed. So I want to try to affect that. I can't affect that everywhere, but I can in certain spaces that I have experience. So that brings us full circle then back to financial services of some kind, any kind of other utility services like digital IDs, etc. But to do it at a government level so I can affect as many people in a population as possible. I also believe that what hinders opportunity is corruption. Blockchains in themselves are efficiently designed conceptually to remove intermediaries. Typically, that's where the corruption occurs, is in the intermediary. So we wanted to bring something that actually worked in a real world setting, that had the necessary throughput, was a light enough footprint, that had low network energy, that could run on mobile devices, and could be robust enough to be deployed at a governmental level. So that's what we're doing. We've designed our chain specifically for that, and we have many governmental deployments right now.
So you're an OG in the blockchain space. What was it like when you first came across the concept, and what prompted you to decide that this is one of the things you would want to do professionally?
That's a good question. The database side, data warehousing, those pieces have always intrigued me. They're the core of any legitimate system. My degrees in cognitive science, which we would call artificial intelligence today, has always sort of put me on the cutting edge. I worked in military aerospace, both here in the United States and in many foreign countries. And the idea that academia was presenting behind these first blockchains like Bitcoin, etc., was incredibly intriguing to me because it was a first departure from SQL, right? Something that's been long-standing, has a lot of companies that are behind it. It's obviously a de facto standard. But we haven't seen any real evolution, something new and unique, until we saw Bitcoin. Having said that, I looked into that and was disappointed with a variety of different pieces associated with it. It was really an academic program put together that had a good start, but didn't really address anything that I could use in a real world setting. Far too slow, footprints were far too big. The timing and resources would create super high network energy. All these things are completely counter to what we would actually look for in any kind of company or real world setting. So, what intrigued me though was that evolution. It was a next step. So, how do I create something that actually can be used in those real world settings that doesn't necessarily have to have the same capabilities as a SQL server, but it has to fulfill the business needs. So, what are the core business needs? That's what I set out to look at. We spent a lot of years in fintech actually understanding the needs of the bank and the needs of the consumer. And what we found was, anonymity and some of these other things, very interesting, but certainly not something that operates in a real world setting. If you're going to operate on a large scale, anonymity doesn't fly in the face of regulators and law enforcement and everything that would actually hinder its deployment. So you have to be able to service both, but you also have to do it at a fast enough speed. And to truly meet the needs that were dictated by Bitcoin as an academic program, you'd have to have a small footprint, something that fits actually on a cell phone. Visa and MasterCard operated about 2,700 transactions a second. That's fast enough for worldwide deployments to manage the billions and billions of swipes that go on. So I don't need to have 17 trillion transactions a second like I can do in SQL servers under a mass cluster, right? So what was the real world setting that actually made sense in the blockchain landscape? Well, at least 2,700 transactions a second. But then you had to reduce the epochs. That was the other thing I saw. Was, well, this is a 10-minute epoch. I can't stand in front of a cash register swiping my card waiting 10 minutes. And that's, of course, the minimum cycle. But typically it's taking much longer for that to actually occur. Banks have a 100 millisecond window in which they do an atomic transaction where they put something into the database and come back and re-verify. So if you don't have a short enough epoch, you can't actually operate with those groups. And some of the things that I used to hear when we were sort of growing up in the space was, we're going to replace the banks. We're going to replace all the money and fiat in the world. And I used to chuckle to myself, having been in that space. May West, May East, all the center points for internet transmissions are all owned by banks. So if the banks went down, those connections go down. I'm not sure how you're going to actually maintain your network for your blockchain running your cryptocurrency that was going to replace fiat. So the short answer to your question was, I saw a lot of potential, but then realized there was this very, very serious amount of silliness that just wasn't going to work in any real setting. And I watched for a very long time, and we saw the small evolutions of the blockchain community. We saw how we were solving some of the problems in cryptocurrencies. But until late, when we get to stablecoins and we get to institutional investors, BlackRock ETFs, until you actually are removing layer twos in favor of a layer one that's actually designed from scratch to do what the layer two is adding to an existing chain, you're not really going to get anywhere. So this is an exciting time because those things now exist. This is where RYT comes in. It's finally time to actually deploy something meaningful in the real world setting.
I tend to agree. Now, in terms of use cases, and this show is obsessed with use cases because we feel it's the easier way for us to articulate the value of blockchains. You mentioned financial services, fintech, and identity as kind of three kind of swim lanes there. Are there any particular use cases where you feel this technology is playing in the better space? Is this more on the trading? Is it payments? What are the, say, the two levels down in terms of use cases where you have been working the most?
Right. So where we're working the most is trying to remove intermediaries and trying to remove corruption. Here's some perfect examples of use cases. So we are currently deploying the national ID system for Pakistan. We're currently deploying a national ID system for Costa Rica, and we're currently working on one, which we hope to deploy in Q1 next year for Panama. Now, what that does is it ensures that the people who are entitled to services in that country are actually presenting a real person. We know from beginning to end that this person has been identified properly, that they're not dead, that they're not coming twice. Some of these problems that happened recently in the United States, I think there was over 12 million people on the Social Security system that might have been over 220 years old, right? Silly things like that that a national ID system properly run would be able to circumvent. Now I have citizens that are actually getting identified properly and then therefore are available for service. As an example, Costa Rica estimates that it is spending an extra $30 billion a year on fake people. And they can't figure out where to solve that. We come in with that solution. One, we're going to identify these people from beginning to end as real. We're going to give you the opportunity to ping our systems and on a real-time basis identify somebody. Now you have a basis, though, that you can do some interesting things. In Costa Rica, for example, they have a socialized medicine system. Wonderful, high quality, but you can't get an appointment because there's an intermediary sitting in the middle who's saying, happy to give you an appointment if you give me $50 USD. Otherwise, you're going to wait a year and a half. So a perfect example of corruption that can be eliminated by terminating an intermediary. Now, the citizens of Costa Rica can get healthcare in a timely manner, not just high quality, but in an actual timely manner. Second thing that we're helping them with, and we're do the same thing in the Panama region, police resources. It turns out something like 28% of police resources in Costa Rica are actually stolen by corrupt crime organizations. No one knows that. So the crime organizations are actually getting most of their weapons and vehicles and armor from the legitimate police because it's either being stolen or sold by legitimate police. Okay, remove that and just do standard inventory management. But that has to be incorporated into a national ID system so that we can identify whether or not this is actually a real police officer. Third issue is education. What they're finding is they've got a minister of education who's promoting excellent educational services, but they're not making it to the ground. They're being corrupted in the middle where teachers and superintendents are just going off road. They also are allowing fake degrees, including, to come back to the police, fake credentials having gone through a police training system. Most of them never actually did it. It's been faked. So you have teachers who are not teaching the curriculum, who are giving degrees to people for payment that didn't actually go through and get the work done. You're seeing officers in the field who didn't actually go through training, and you're seeing a variety of corruptions in terms of selling off assets and selling those degrees for financial gain through the intermediaries. The list goes on, but that all starts, of course, with the national ID system, right? When we look at Pakistan and Panama, they have fractional share housing systems, most of which are being faked. The title that you buy may not actually be the title to the place that you think you're buying. In fact, there might be 4 or 5 people who think they own that same building. There's land surveys that are going on in Panama that are completely being faked. So there's a variety of different places that wouldn't immediately come to mind, but they are presenting massive loss to these governments in the billions and billions, which they could be redirecting to better services. And so this is some of the use cases that we're operating with. Then, of course, you have regular, sort of, if you will, corporate solutions. We're working with the fastest growing dating app in America to back end them with a blockchain. We're working with two RTDs and a vodka so that you can actually trace from beginning to end where it was sourced and how it arrived on your drink. You can see this so that there's full transparency there. And so there's some things that are just not consequential necessarily to the financial market, but they are consequential to those that are socially minded. And so we can play in both routes, and we are. So we're taking a tack in the corporate world that is not just fintech, where money movement and value transfer is occurring, but just in real world settings where someone wants to see, did the vodka actually come from Austria, right, as they say it did? And then all the way up to full governmental level deployment so that the citizenship can get the best possible services. So that's where we're going with some of these use cases. I can go into great detail whenever you'd like.
It speaks to also one of the things that attracted me to blockchain originally, which is the data. We're talking about one of the most precious assets out there in the digital sphere, and those use cases, especially those non-financial ones, they speak a lot to the value of the data, the value of data integrity, the value of data validity, and all the aspects surrounding data governance that for some reason we continue to insist are not important until some tragic situation happens and we have to fix everything, right? But I'm gonna kind of double click on the performance aspect of what you described. One of the characteristics of the blockchain concept, or the blockchain as a family of technologies, is the so-called trilemma between security, decentralization, and scalability. Um, the performance levels that these applications in these use cases require, they will vary. But if they're running on the same infrastructure, they will all subject to the same trilemma. You made an allusion to layer twos and layer ones, which layer twos are, as the audience knows, is a scalability solution for specific blockchain ecosystems. How are you addressing that as you develop right to become this backbone of society as you just described?
That's a great question, and that was actually at the core of our design decisions. So, what I did was to look at this and say, okay, I need to manage attack vector security. Okay, the way that blockchain does that is manyfold, but in most circumstances, it's just sheer numbers. Right, so larger the network, the larger your ability to recover from an attack, the larger your ability to stay off an attack. You obviously have to manage the nodes at each level, validators, etc. There are, dual spans, all kinds of different attack vectoring mechanisms that come into play. So you have to address that too at an individual node level. You have to be able to figure out when there's a bad actor or a good actor. You also need to create throughput. So we're running somewhere between 30 and 40,000 transactions a second on a T2 grade, medium grade machine. So that's basically a laptop. Okay, so very light footprint. I also need to keep network energy down. I can't have a high energy consumption solution that will immediately negate or gate the number of nodes that can actually be run in the system. Footprint, node size, throughput, anything that would gate the proliferation of nodes needs to be eliminated. Okay. But then you have to deal with the node specific attack vectoring mechanisms, right? What is it that they do? How do they become corrupt? How is a corrupt node injected into a network? And so our designs are really centered around something I did for aerospace. I built a lot of technology for aerospace, particularly one of the strategic initiatives for what we call the Star Wars program in the United States, missile combat. What was necessary there was an understanding that some nodes appear good and will do the right thing for a very long time, all the way up until they don't. Some nodes immediately come in and are corrupted. Some nodes come in and have been corrupted but could regain. So now there has to be a self-healing piece to this design. We put that into play. Whereas any other blockchain, under the right circumstances, will fork. You'll have isolated parts of the network. Okay, we can't have that. I need that network to come back to life and reintegrate itself automatically. So I have to make three assumptions. I have good actors who are not, they're just pretending. I have bad actors who were corrupted but are not actually bad. They were fed bad data, for example. And then I have actual bad actors. So one of the secrets to our network is that at any given time, 1/32 of the network is offline. But no one knows it. The nodes don't even know that they're offline. They're still acting. So something that oddly enough, the mafia does. We've all seen the movies. We employ strategies just like this in aerospace and in this blockchain. I'm sorry, they'll say from a lead command, you're my greatest soldier, but you don't get to come tonight. We're not taking you on this particular gig. You're sitting this one out. And you would say to yourself, well, isn't he your best soldier? Why would you leave this person sitting out of that gig? What they're doing is they're saying, oh, I don't know if you're really my best soldier. You might just be pretending to be my best soldier. So I'm going to sit you down every once in a while just to make sure. Then I have the bad actors who I'm clearly been watching. What would they do? Would they actually call that person out, or would they start to isolate them and use them as this tool? So they'll actually let that bad operator continue to operate in their network, even though they know they're a bad operator. They just don't follow anything or give them anything of consequence. So they're keeping their enemies close. And there's so many other tactics that have been around for literally thousands of years that are social constructs that, if correctly brought into a computing construct, you now have the same benefits. So we take a lot of social constructs and build those into our network for network attack vector mitigation. You still need the speed though. You still need to propagate fast. What we do, instead of sending blocks around, we actually only send hash codes, very light network energy. Each node is actually a validator in our network. All nodes are validators. There isn't a pool of validators and then they disseminate blocks. You are a component. You are, for the first time in a blockchain that has a true democracy, you are actually distributed. If you look at a proof of work or something along those lines, you're going to find a very, very concentrated pool of nodes that do the work for the entire network. It's not actually distributed, right? In the old days, you had to have a $20 million rig to run a Bitcoin mining operation, right? How many people had that? Although there were 10,000 or so nodes out there, there's only 14 or 16 that were actually controlling the entire network. That is not distributed. Okay, we need the exact opposite. I need a fully distributed network operating in a democratic mode. To do that, I can't send blocks all over the network. I have to send hash codes at most. So we actually have a real-time voting system that happens across the entire network, which lends itself to that self-healing. So you can't corrupt a node and enter a bad vote, if you will, because it'll be overwhelmed by the other network nodes. So lots of different mechanisms are built in there to attack throughput, to create a small footprint, to manage network energy, and to ensure that there is a true democratic process while factoring in the solution wherein we might not know who's a bad actor, don't care though. So I don't want to go through the work of figuring you out. I'm just going to eliminate you periodically and bring you back in periodically. Now I don't have to go through that work. So when new attack vectors are brought to the table, we'll be insulated.
That's an interesting approach to security. Uh, the ins and outs that those are interesting. The Block Drops podcast is proud to be supported by Simoto. Simoto is the largest B2B ecosystem in Web3 built around three verticals. First, a curated marketplace that lets you quickly discover, compare, and review the best crypto providers and products. Second, independent consulting that runs your project management and vendor selection so complex launches stay on time and on budget. Third, a boutique desk that helps you design and execute complex OTC transactions with true white glove support so you're never alone in the hardest decisions. Check out Simoto.io for more. Building such a technology and then delivering across these many geographies and use cases is not a walk in the park. I'm also a chain builder, and I know some of those challenges to build and grow. Um, what are the lessons learned from the early days to now that you were able to just leverage from and then and iterate and get better? What were the things that you're carrying out to the next stages of working on the system and taking this further?
So the biggest challenge is always getting to the end user, bringing a service out to the end user. Getting out to the end user is incredibly time consuming and expensive if you try to do it directly. So what you need is a trusted source. You need a source that the end user already trusts, and then you engage them. In this case, it's the government that we're working with in the various countries that we're associated with. They are the trusted source. Now, we might be able to argue that no one trusts their government, but it doesn't matter. That's where they're getting their services. Okay. So we go to the government agencies instead of going to the individuals. You won't see a campaign of ours that's directed to consumers. We consider that a waste of time and a waste of money. You also can't change people's behaviors, we've learned. It's incredibly difficult and expensive to change behaviors. But behaviors are always evolving. So, what you need to do is just slightly get ahead of where they're already going. Now you can take advantage of that natural shift in behaviors without you having to produce it. If you had to produce that, it would be incredibly expensive, and this is where the failure point for most groups occurs. Having said that, now you have certain lessons that you've learned in how to approach the consumer space by not approaching the consumer space, right? Go through a third party that's trusted. We are finding many, many wonderful pieces of software out there, blockchains, etc., that somehow think they're going to go directly to the consumer space. And it's unfortunate because these wonderful pieces of technology die on the vine because there's no possible way for them to do this. The money involved is in the billions to make that happen. So just because you raise 20 million or 50 million or 200 million, it's not enough. You won't succeed unless some, lightning strike happens and you get a little bit of luck. But your wonderful project, your amazing technology that you built is unlikely to see the light of day for those reasons. So now, how do you deal with the government? Right? That's no small feat. Right? I've got to be able to deploy on large scale. I have to be able to go through piloting programs. I have to actually know how to work through the government agencies. It's not just some gatekeeper who says yes. Then you have to work through regulatory environments, etc. So what we do at RYT is we actually work with the political organizations and help shape those environments by introducing bills that get turned into laws. Those laws happen to favor a reduction in corruption through various technologies. We are that technology. Now, we're not named as a technology in those bills, but we're primed because we wrote those bills and we understand what the resulting law will look like. That's not easy either. right? That costs a lot of money, and you need to be able to reach the right people. We happen to know that. So what you find is that that young person who has an excellent idea, who has built something magnificent, it will again never see the light of day because they don't have the money to go to consumers. Even if they did, they wouldn't know how. They can't go to governments because no one will take them seriously because they don't understand the back doors of those governments. And so I hate to say it this way, you need some gray hairs to make that happen. And that's what we do, right? So we have multinational companies already. We understand global footprints. It's always going to be an organization that has that seasoning already. It's going to bring something magnificent to the table, or even subpar, because that magnificent thing will never make it.
Building an ecosystem is usually more about the people than it is about the technology, even though the technology is still the enabler, but the ecosystem really is built on what people call the layer zero or the layer P, the people involved, right?
And that's where we find some solace, if you will, in the space. Unfortunately, the space in general is only about 12 million people. So when we're talking to those that are considered the experts in the space, that are considered the rising stars in the space, they're still only touching a very, very small part of our worldwide population. And so we're looking for the people outside that 12 million. That's who represents the biggest portions of the populations. No one will take you seriously outside that 12 million because they don't know about blockchain. They don't care about blockchain. All they care about is the benefit that they receive. So you have to sell on benefit. You can't go out to if you will, the mainstream people and try and sell on a blockchain. You've lost them right away. So you sell on benefits. Okay. So now these pundits and these experts and these rising stars inside that 12 million population just became useless because they're not moving this outside that. But this is where you need the institutional investors because the mainstream people believe the institutional investors. So having BlackRock come in, they've created some excellent opportunities for people. They've created a lot of wealth for people, but what they've really done is they've validated the space, and now mainstreamers will look at that and go, okay, I'm willing to pay attention now. Before that, it would have been incredibly difficult to move a blockchain into a regular mainstream user space. If you need proof of that, go look at Ripple, go look at all the ones that have been around for a long time that have never actually done what they said they were going to do. They were too early and they didn't have the prowess to actually move into a mainstream setting, certainly not at a governmental level, even though they say they can do that. I haven't seen a success yet. We have real world projects today. We're not just talking about these things.
It's interesting you say this. I also feel that the ETFs, the crypto ETFs, were kind of the coming of age for the industry. Like, oh, okay, now these are serious people. We can talk to them now. But you also touched on something that to me is very important. Is as a product person, I wish people didn't care about the tech. I just wish people would absolutely just reap the benefits. And I like the Homer Simpson meme where it's backing into the bushes. That's what I want for blockchains, to just go like and hide behind whatever the facade is, and just let the benefit speak for itself. And I think that's a great way to see this. Now you're a builder. This is an industry that works 24/7, 365. Blockchains don't stop producing blocks. How do you keep yourself sane and healthy working in this industry?
That's a good question. I think you have to trade busyness for productive, right? So you have to look at everything that you're doing and saying, okay, does this specific thing get me farther or closer to my goal? And if the answer is it doesn't do either, or it gets me farther away, then don't do it. And so we find ourselves with full plates all the time. We're always stressed out. And so I like to say, I could work 24/7 and still not finish. Right? Having said that, it's because most of the stuff that's on my plate doesn't actually need to be done, right? So I have a saying with my developers: don't polish the turd, deploy that thing. We'll fix it, we'll get it working. But if you sit there constantly trying to polish this thing, perfection costs too much. You can't work on a basis of creating perfect. Now, we're programmers, though. We want perfect. And so you have to find a place in your life journey, in your story, where you say, perfection costs too much. I got to put good enough, and then let the market tell me what changes I need to make to it. So I've got to deploy. Then all of a sudden, my plate gets less full, and now I can keep up with the load. Having said that, we also have vast teams that work for us. So, because of our long standing in many verticals, we have literally hundreds of engineers that already work for us in our other projects that we, on a dime, steer right into these types of projects and say, got a new one for you. Here's our designs. Here's our prototypes. I want you to build real world version of this. I want you to stand up 500 nodes right now and start working through this. I want you to stand up 10,000 nodes in our private networks. Well, we actually have those machines. And that gives us an advantage. Many other groups, especially those guys that are, as I like to say, building something amazing in their dorm room, they don't have those resources. They just don't have it. So it's going to be very difficult for them to do that. Without those resources, this becomes an overwhelming task. So clear my plate and use my resources. But I've taken decades to build those.
It takes time to build time. That's for sure. Um, in that sense, I mean, you were talking about the industry, and you mentioned a few players. What would be the one thing, in your opinion, that as an industry we need to fix right now to avoid working another decade or two on this, and then realizing we didn't fix that and we ended up at the same place? What's that one thing, and why?
I think the one thing is really a plethora of things that we don't know about yet. Deploy these things in real world settings and see where they break. Now you'll learn what you were missing. Building things for academia or for my friends to see or for a few developers that are pundits in this space, that's really more of an ego stroke. You should, in fact, push things out and let other people break them. Now, that doesn't help your ego, but it'll tell you exactly where we need to pay attention. So, my answer to your question is I let other people tell me that because I set aside my ego and say, I hope that you break it because then I'll fix it. So when I refactor something, it's because some very serious and very intelligent people broke it for me. That's the best way to go after this. And so if I were to take a different tack to your question, I would say that value transmission is not enough. Like you said earlier in the conversation, it must be data. Here's a great example. I go to the doctor recently. I'm going to have a procedure. They're asking me questions about when was the last time I had something like that? Can you show us the data? Do you remember your doctor? And I'm getting overwhelmed. I'm like, I don't remember any of that information. I don't have it. I don't have the results. I don't know what doctor. I don't even remember what hospital. I can't give you the dates. I have nothing that you're asking me for. Boy, would it be nice to have that information at my disposal, right? How helpful would that be for every person on this planet to be able to carry around their personal records in a secure way, anonymously, but where they can access it and then deliver it as needed to those groups that want to help them, right? I mean, how many times do we have medications, for example? Most people don't know this, but medication adherence is an issue. Just taking your meds, especially if you're an elderly person, you forget, maybe you double up, you do something wrong. But the other is making sure that meds are compatible. Your heart doctor is giving you something different than your bowel doctor is, and it turns out they're not complementary. They, in fact, negate each other. So you're getting nothing. All right. So it would be really, really important for me to see data at my fingertips across the 360 view of my life that I can then coordinate with those caregivers or anybody else providing these services to ensure that I'm not having medical incompatibility, for example, or anything like that. So I'd like to see data focused, but right now most people are focused on value transmissions because they see a way to monetize that value transmission. And this is where they're going to quote, get rich. I'm saying play the long game and provide a true service to people. You will get paid.
Yeah, it's the data, man. It's always about the data. Now, when people from your previous life in financial services and fintech reach out to you saying, "Hey, I saw that Bitcoin has a new all-time high. How do I get into your industry?" What's your usually your welcome to crypto onboarding process for these people? Do you do that, or do you just say no, don't get involved?
No, I say dabble because I say, look at if you're, yes, Bitcoin's at an all-time high. Okay, but it really only represents a 5-10% increase over the last year or so. As an investment across the board for your financial well-being, I would say it's a component that diversifies, but you're not doubling or tripling your money. You're not doing anything magical here. You're just seeing a modest gain. There's a lot of hype around it, and it helps to validate the space. But really, go to a mutual fund, you might get 37% every single year, right? So there's safer ways to do this. Having said that, yeah, dabble in it. Get to know the space. Get comfortable with this type of investment. Understand what a wallet is and all the sort of nuances that are necessary, because there are deviations from everything else that you're doing in your financial life. So go ahead and play with it, but by no means liquidate everything you have and go buy Bitcoin. Do not do that.
Yes, and just to remind the audience, none of this is financial advice. Go do your own research. Jeff, this was a really good conversation, an interesting peek in how you approach the problem and the solution. How can people learn more about you and RYT and get in touch and explore this new avenue?
Fantastic. You can go to ryt.io. I'm always on LinkedIn. I'm not much of a social media person. I'm more into actually creating tech. I build things because I want other people to use them, not because I need people to know me. And so you don't see much of me in social media. Happy to talk to anybody. Give you a little secret. If you send something to admin, I'll get it.
That's a great tip. That's a great tip. Jeff, thank you so much, man. I appreciate you taking the time with us and learning more about you and your story. Thanks for trusting us with that. And maybe see you next time. Thank you.
I hope so. And thank you for the opportunity. This has been a real pleasure.
Catch us online. We're on Instagram at BlockDropsPodcast, on Twitter at BlockDropsPod or Xerox Mauricio. We're on Lens at blockdrops.lens. We have a newsletter on LinkedIn. Write to us at blockdropspodcast@gmail.com. And you can listen to the BlockDrops podcast at Spotify, iColab, Faberbun Tech, and all of the other major streaming platforms. Yay! Shout out to Jeff for bringing such a balanced approach to solving real-world problems with blockchain. Shout out to Naveen Saleh for making this conversation possible. The BlockDrops podcast is open for sponsorships next year, so if you're interested, reach out to us through the contacts on the show notes. Don't forget to leave the ratings on your favorite player and check out the merch store at blockdropspodcast.xyz. This is all for today. Stay rare, stay weird. LFG.